Hi, everyone. This last week, I attended the ASB conference in Madison, and it was awesome. And after my talk, a few people came to me and they told me that they liked my presentation and they thought it was really fun. And I thought I would make a video on my presentation. So here we go. And so my talk was about advancing the use of IMUs for assessing sprinting performance. And the main reason why we care is because we want to assess sprinting performance and to be able to run as fast as Bolt was running here in the 2008 Olympics. There's an art to it. And how can we assess Bolt's art to sprinting? Well, something that we can do is that we can take a look at the speed curve. And from the speed curve, we can get different measures, such as what is the athlete top speed or how long it takes the athlete to be able to reach top speed. In this presentation, I will first give you a quick overview about IMUs and sprinting. I will then talk about the first study and then about the second study. And to get started with IMUs and sprinting, and for those of you that are unfamiliar with them, just know that these are small wearable sensors that we can put pretty much anywhere on the body, and they measure triaxial accelerations and also triaxial angular velocities. And you may think that if we want to get some sprinting performance determinants, for example, stride length, because we can measure linear accelerations, we would just need to double integrate to get to position, and then it should be fairly straightforward to get to stride length. However, if you just do this, this will not work very well. And the reason for that is because of drift error and because IMUs are measuring gravity, which we need to remove before we perform this double integration. However, a method that is available and takes care of these issues is the zero velocity update, or the ZUPT method, which takes care of these issues and allows us to go from acceleration to stride length effectively. And just a note that this method works great for jogging. But does it work well for sprinting? Well, unfortunately, no. And in particular, I would like to point you to a study from 2022 in which they used this method for speeds higher than 9 meters per second. And they tried to assess its accuracy in estimating a single stride length to the stride lengths obtained with a camera. In this figure, you can see the results that they obtained. So in the x-axis, you can see the stride length from the camera, and in the y-axis, the difference between the IMU and the camera. And we can see that they got errors as high as 30%. And one of the reasons of these big errors could have been accelerometer saturation. In particular, they used a 16G IMU. And this is really bad because especially at ground contact, we're losing a lot of information, and this becomes an issue when we're performing the double integration. So we were wondering if we could actually do better. And that was the main motivation for the first study, in which we essentially wanted to evaluate the accuracy of IMU-based stride lengths and total distance traveled for 80-meter sprints with a high range IMU. And in particular, the IMU that we used was the blue trident, which has a G range that can go up to 200 Gs. So a much higher range than the 16 Gs used in the previous study. Now, recall that before I mentioned that going from acceleration to stride length was challenging and that we had to use this method. The way that this method works is that it assumes the foot's velocity is 0 during stance to correct for integration drift. And to show you what this means, so if we have someone walking, we would expect that the foot's velocity during stance would be 0. However, as we can see here, over the course of these two strides, we're accumulating over 0.5 meters per second of drift. And the idea with this method is that when we know that the foot's velocity is going to be 0, we can correct the velocities back to 0. And note that this assumption that the foot is stationary also holds for sprinting, because during sprinting, there is a small portion during stance in which the foot becomes still. This method works in 4 different steps, but so you have the main ideas. First, we need to detect time points of 0 velocity. Then we can correct for drift, remove gravity, and compute the foot orientation in space. And finally, we can get our outcome measure, in this case, stride length. Now, for this first study, we had 17 subjects. They all could run 100 meters in 14 seconds or less, and they were free of injury at the time of testing. They were wearing a blue trident IMU attached to the instep of the shoe. They performed 80-meter sprints. They started at complete rest, and we had 2 cameras. So one at 20 meters and another one at 70 meters from the start. In terms for the validation, here I will just show you how we validated this method on a single stride basis, but note that we applied the same methodology to validate this method on a cumulative distance basis. We used this formula, and as you can see here, we're computing the stride length from Kinovia. And so with Kinovia, we were able to capture the consecutive frames in which the foot reached midstance. And then with the help of a calibration grid, we were able to accurately extract stride length from the cameras. And for the results, so in the x-axis, I will have speed plotted, and in the y-axis, the different errors. So in estimating a single stride, we can see that the errors remain between 3% to -6%, and in estimating the total distance from 0 meters to 70 meters, the errors also remain between around 2% to -5%. And that's great, because that means that both speed and then also distance are IMU based. But the question that I really want to answer, or we care to answer, is how can I improve my pure sprinting performance, right? Because if you look at this black curve, I would argue that this corresponds to a pretty decent sprinter. But then if you look at my curve, it doesn't look as good. And so for me, with this black curve, I can know these sprinters, top speed or contact time, but does that information really help me to improve my sprinting performance? Well, no. And so that was the main motivation for the second study. And in that case, we were looking at measures that could be actionable. And in particular, we focused on negative foot speed. And negative foot speed is essentially the downward and backward motion of the foot and ground contact. And we know that it's highly correlated with top speed, but this was found in a motion capture study. So the questions were, can we actually get this measure from IMUs? And can we also find the same correlation with top speed? And so for the second study, the aim was to investigate the relationship between IMU-based negative foot speed and top sprinting speed. In terms of how we did it, just like before, we used the ZUPT method, and now the outcome measure was negative foot speed. We tried to see if there were any correlations with top speed, and we used the same protocol as with the first study. And for the results, in the x-axis, I will have top stride speed plotted from the IMU, and in the y-axis, the different components of negative foot speed. We found a significant association between the anterior-posterior component of negative foot speed with top speed, or the backward component, and also with the vertical component. And that's great, because that means that now I know exactly what I need to do to improve my pure sprinting performance. My aim, or I should aim for my foot to come backwards and downwards faster at every single stride to, hopefully one day become half decent. And as a recap from my talk, there were mainly 2 key points that I wanted you to get. The first is the improved validity of the ZUPT method with IMUs better suited for sprint performance. Here, you can see the results that we obtained, and note that the highest errors were close to 6%. And here, you can see the results from the 2022 study, and note that the highest errors were close to 30%. So that's a really big improvement between consecutive studies. And the second key point is that negative foot speed is an important actionable sprinting predictor. And that's really exciting, because right now, from a single IMU attached to the instep of the shoe, we can get the speed curve, and from the speed curve, we can get the different splits and different measures for every single split, and even estimates of force and power outputs. We can also get measures on a stride-by-stride basis. So for example, stride length, contact time, frequency, stride speed, so on. We can also get actionable measures. So for example, negative foot speed. And we also know how the foot is moving and is oriented in space for every single stride of a sprint. In conclusion, for speeds, up to 9.5 meters per second, cumulative and individual stride distance errors were within -4 to 2% and -6 to 3%, respectively. And faster top speeds were achieved with greater anterior, posterior, and vertical components of negative foot speed. I would like to thank everyone that contributed to this research, and then also in the makings of this presentation. And I thought I would leave you with a small haiku that I got from ChatGPT, which I think is pretty funny, and also with the QR codes for the studies, that the one that just got published a few months ago, and for the next one that is currently in review, and hopefully will get published soon. So thank you.